It's unbelievable that a group of fake cops, led by the HOA, showed up at the real cop's house and told him he'd violated the community rules. This was before the HOA realized he was the police chief. After the HOA found out he was a cop, her next actions left the entire neighborhood in shock. Even a seasoned officer like him was stunned for 3 whole seconds before he made them all regret messing with the wrong person. That morning, Daniel was sipping his coffee quite calmly when he caught sight of a group of people standing outside in the reflection of his window. There were 3 of them on his sidewalk, all wearing matching polo shirts, sunglasses, and an air of authority that looked like it was bought at an embarrassingly cheap clearance sale. One of them was holding a notepad. Another had a toy walkie-talkie strapped around her waist, and the best part was the woman in the middle with shoulder-length dyed hair, arms crossed, and a face like she just chugged a liter of fresh lemons, Linda. She stood out as the leader of the group, as if she were the general of a dim-witted army. Daniel took a deep breath, finished his last sip of coffee, and went to open the door. Before he could fully swing it open, Linda started talking like she was holding a press conference. "You're in serious violation of HOA rules, and we're here to take action." Daniel stared at the woman, half expecting a hidden camera. Was this a joke? What did she want now? Before he could say anything, she whipped out a laminated piece of paper and shoved it in his face. "You're under investigation for multiple violations, including unauthorized fence painting, improperly placed trash bins." And she paused dramatically, as if she were about to accuse him of murder. Conduct unbecoming of a community member. He had to stifle a laugh. The fence had been the same color since Daniel moved in. His trash bins were placed just like everyone else's on the block, and conduct unbecoming was just another way of saying Daniel simply refused to attend the boring house meetings and pointless HOA gatherings. That's when the unbelievable part kicked in. Because you've refused to heed previous warnings, the HOA is exercising its right to civilian detention, and we're here to arrest you until this matter is resolved. Detention? Daniel blinked a few times, trying to process what she was saying. "You want to arrest me?" Linda puffed out her chest, like she was about to receive a medal for bravery. "The HOA has full authority over this neighborhood." The 2 stooges behind her nodded in sync, like a well-rehearsed parrot choir. That's when he realized the level of insanity. They genuinely thought they had the power to arrest someone. They had no idea. Daniel Miller wasn't some circus security guard or a neighborhood volunteer. He was the town's police chief, badge, gun, and a surprising amount of patience for this kind of nonsense. Keeping his cool, Daniel decided to play along for a moment of amusement. "Care to explain exactly how you plan to arrest me?" he said. Linda pointed to one of her goons, a guy with a beer gut and a polo shirt 3 sizes too small. He pulled out a pair of plastic handcuffs painted silver, something anyone not in law enforcement might not clock as fake. "We have our methods," the guy said, trying to sound tough. Daniel was floored by the sham unfolding at his doorstep. He took a deep breath, stepped back, and in one swift motion pulled his wallet from his pocket, flipping it open to reveal his shiny badge. Linda's smile vanished faster than a fast and furious actor's career. "You think you can arrest me?" Daniel said in the most serious tone he could muster. "Because right now, you're committing a laundry list of crimes, including impersonating a law enforcement officer and attempted kidnapping." Instant silence. Linda's eyes widened. Her minions exchanged glances, and for the first time, they realized they'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. "What are you implying?" the woman stammered, her confidence crumbling like a house made of rotten oak in a storm. Daniel crossed his arms. "I'm implying that unless you get off my property in the next 5 seconds, I'll arrest you for real." Sweat started trickling down one of the goons' foreheads. Linda's hand trembled slightly as she clung to her laminated paper. And then, like a pack of squirrels fleeing a hollow tree about to crash into a river, they began backing away, muttering lame excuses. "This isn't over," Linda yelled before spinning on her heel and disappearing with her pathetic posse. Daniel watched them go, a mix of amusement and disbelief washing over him at the sheer lunacy of what had just happened. But deep down, he knew this was far from the end. If he thought that ridiculous arrest attempt was the punchline, he was dead wrong. He'd known plenty of stubborn people, but Linda and her crew had elevated it to an almost artistic level. Normal folks would take the loss and move on with their lives, but not this woman. Not only did she refuse to back down, she decided to double down. The first retaliation happened the next day when I went out to take out the trash. Daniel realized his bins were gone, just completely vanished. No sign of them on the sidewalk or beside the house. He looked around, and of course, he spotted Linda across the street, standing with her arms crossed like she thought she was the queen of the neighborhood. When their eyes met, she flashed a smug, satisfied smile before heading inside. Daniel took a deep breath and tried to brush it off. But then, when he checked his mailbox, he found an envelope stamped with the HOA logo. He opened it, knowing it'd be garbage, and he wasn't disappointed. A list of penalties for, according to them, failing to meet community standards. Among the gems, they claimed Daniel was banned from using waste disposal services, couldn't park near the curb anymore, and had to attend a mandatory meeting to discuss his unacceptable behavior. He grabbed the letter and tore it in half right there, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. If Linda wanted to mess with him, she'd have to try harder. But of course, she had more tricks up her witchy sleeve. That afternoon, Daniel stepped out to handle a traffic collision, and when he got back, he found an orange cone smack in the middle of his driveway. Next to it was a laminated notice stuck to a piece of wood, like it was some official decree. The notice said his garage was ordered shut by the HOA. It was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever seen. How can anyone have the gall to ban someone else's garage? He marched over, ripped the paper off, and tossed the cone onto the sidewalk. Across the street, Daniel saw two of Linda's cronies watching, one of them scribbling something in a notepad. Who knows what? Maybe homeowner improperly removing cone. As if they were serious investigators, instead of two clowns playing inspector. Less than 3 minutes later, Linda appeared. "You can't remove that." Daniel stared at her clutching the cone, like it was a murder weapon. "Oh, I can't park in my own house." She jabbed a finger at the laminated sheet, her face flushed with anger. "This is an HOA sanction. You can't ignore community rules." Daniel took a deep breath to keep from spitting in her face. "Linda, you don't have the authority to ban my garage. In fact, you don't have the authority to do anything except annoy me," Daniel said. His voice heavy like a boulder was sitting on his chest. Linda's eyes widened with indignation, but before she could respond, he went inside and slammed the door. But the story wasn't over. The next day, while Daniel was at the police station, he got a call from one of the few neighbors not part of this insane HOA gang. "Daniel, there are 2 cops at your house." He stopped what he was doing, listening as the older neighbor woman spoke. "2 cops. They say they got a report about a man with a gun on your property." That's when Daniel knew Linda had upped the ante. She'd called the police and spun a tale to get him in trouble. He grabbed his cruiser and drove straight home. When he arrived, he saw 2 officers talking to Linda, who was playing the victim card better than ever, her demeanor that of someone deeply concerned for community safety. If he didn't know she was a snake, he might have bought it. Daniel stepped out of his car, and the cops recognized him on the spot. He knew both of them, good, honest guys, and he could tell from their faces they knew they were there on a wild goose chase. "Oh, geez, Chief," one of them said, a little embarrassed. "We got a report of suspicious activity involving a man with a gun at this residence." Daniel looked straight at Linda. "I bet that report came from this woman right here, huh?" She tried to play it off, pressing a hand to her chest. "Me? I just reported what I heard. Some people saw suspicious movement and got worried." The cops exchanged a fed-up glance. One of them sighed and turned to him. "Well, since there's no real threat, we'll chalk it up as a prank. But, Ms. Linda, just for the record, false reporting can get you in a lot of trouble." Her face turned beet red. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. She opened her mouth to protest, but gave up, crossing her arms in a huff instead. The cops left, and he stood there staring at Linda. She stared back, silent. For the first time, Daniel felt she might actually realize she was playing with fire. But he knew she wasn't done. She'd try something worse, and he couldn't wait to see how far this woman would go before she completely destroyed herself. He already knew Linda wasn't the type to give up after the police fiasco prank. Anyone with a shred of shame would have crawled into a hole and stayed quiet. Not this woman. Losing wasn't an option for her. If the plastic handcuff arrest attempt and fake complaint didn't work, she clearly had a plan C up her sleeve. What he didn't expect, though, was how fast it had come. That evening, Daniel thought he could enjoy a peaceful day to celebrate his birthday with an outdoor barbecue in his backyard, surrounded by close friends. The tantalizing aroma of grilled meat, cold beers, and echoing laughter. It was a day to temporarily forget about the crazy HOA crew and Linda, the shameless ringleader. But Daniel had underestimated just how stubborn that woman could be. The next morning, Daniel woke up early to set up the party in his favorite space, his garden. He arranged tables and chairs in the yard and started the fire, while a female colleague arrived early to help him lay out beef, chicken, and sausages on the grill. The fragrant smoke wafted through the air, mingling with the sound of morning birds chirping. Soon, a few of his friends showed up, bringing drinks and hilarious stories that filled the garden with laughter. The atmosphere was relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt at ease. But then, like an unexpected storm, Linda appeared. She didn't come alone. Accompanying Linda were her two loyal minions, the bald guy with tattoo-covered arms and the short-haired woman who never parted with her notepad. They stood at the edge of the garden, just beyond the fence, staring at the party like a pack of vultures eyeing prey. Daniel tried to ignore them, focusing on flipping the meat on the grill, but he knew the peace wouldn't last long. "Daniel Miller!" Linda shrieked, her shrill voice cutting through the laughter and drawing curious glances from his friends, who turned to see the intruder. Ignoring the strangers, Linda locked her eyes on Daniel. "What do you think you're doing? An outdoor party without HOA permission is a serious violation." Daniel sighed, set down the tongs, and walked over to the fence. "Linda, this is my private property. I don't need your permission to have friends over for food." Linda crossed her arms, her eyes blazing. "Oh, you're wrong. Community rules prohibit noisy gatherings after 6 p.m., and your smoke is polluting this neighborhood's air." She pointed at the grill as if it were a heinous crime. Her words made one of Daniel's friends burst out laughing. "Pollution? You mean the delicious smell of barbecue that the whole block's drooling over?" Laughter erupted from the group, turning Linda's face red with fury. But she wouldn't back down. She marched over the fence and stormed into the garden, clutching a laminated sheet, her apparent talisman that she always carried. "I've warned you enough, Daniel. Now you've gone too far. I demand you and your noisy friends leave this neighborhood immediately." The group fell silent for a moment, stunned by her audacity. Daniel felt his blood boiling, barely able to keep it under control. This wasn't just a party. It was his birthday, and Linda was trying to humiliate him in front of all his friends. He clenched his fists so hard some of his knuckles turned white, suppressing his anger. "Linda, you don't have the right to kick anyone out, and I'll say it again. This is my house, not your playground." Linda smirked, her tone dripping with contempt. "Your house? A low-life cop like you doesn't deserve to live in this decent neighborhood. I'll make sure you're out of here soon, you useless nobody." That was the last straw. Daniel turned without a word and strode into the house. He yanked open the kitchen drawer, where he kept his service pistol in its holster. His hand trembled slightly as he picked it up, a fleeting thought crossing his mind. He'd just scare her, show this intruder who dared insult him on his own land that he wasn't someone to mess with. But as he took one step out the door, Mike and another friend, Sarah, rushed to stop him. "Daniel, calm down." Mike grabbed his shoulders, his voice firm. "She's not worth doing something stupid over." Sarah stepped in, gently prying the holster from his hand. "You're the police chief, remember? Don't let that crazy woman drag you down to her level." Daniel struggled for a moment, letting his friends pull him back to a chair. He saw Linda still standing there, her face pale as she realized what he'd almost done. But instead of running, she screamed, "You dare threaten me? I'll sue you. I'll make sure you lose your job." The fear in her eyes was evident, but her ego was bigger than her fear. After the birthday party fiasco and the tense standoff with Linda, Daniel knew that playing defense wasn't enough anymore. She wouldn't stop. and he couldn't keep letting himself be a sitting duck in his own home. He decided to fight back, not with fists or a gun, but smarter, by rallying the strength of others who'd been bullied by Linda and her unhinged HOA crew. The next morning, as he sipped his coffee, Daniel started recalling stories he'd heard from neighbors. There was Tom, a gentle older man fined for digging a small koi pond in his backyard. Linda called it a pool regulation violation, even though it had nothing to do with swimming. Then there was Maria, a black woman living a few houses down, who'd been banned by Linda from walking her jet black dog because it was an unsuitable breed for neighborhood standards, a flimsy excuse everyone recognized as thinly veiled racism. And young Dave, who'd been slapped with a fine just for painting his garage green instead of the neutral colors the HOA mandated. Not wasting any time, Daniel picked up the phone and called each of them. To his surprise, he didn't need to do much convincing. Mentioning Linda's name was enough to get them on board. "We need to hold a meeting," he told them. "It's time to put an end to this." They'd all had enough, and they quickly agreed. The meeting was set for Saturday night at Tom's house. The once quiet home buzzed with voices as over a dozen neighbors showed up, armed with their frustrations and the ridiculous fines they'd received from the HOA. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, his voice calm but resolute. "Linda thinks she can do whatever she wants, but we're not helpless victims. I've drafted a lawsuit. She trespassed on my property during my birthday party, screaming at me and my friends to leave the neighborhood like she owns the whole town. Who's with me?" Maria raised her hand immediately. "I'm suing her too. She banned me from walking my dog and called me things I won't repeat. It's racism, and I have witnesses." Her voice trembled with anger, her eyes burning with determination. Tom nodded. "She fined me $500 for my fish pond, even though it doesn't bother anyone. I'll sign the joint lawsuit." Dave and the others chimed in, each adding their own examples of Linda's and the HOA's overreach. By the end of the meeting, they had a long list of charges: trespassing, discrimination, abuse of power, and harassment. As everyone prepared to leave, they were startled when Linda burst through the door, her smug grin plastered across her face. "I know why you're all here," she declared, her tone dripping with disdain. "You think those little papers will do anything to me?" She laughed loudly. "Judge Harris is my husband's best friend. He plays golf with him every weekend. These trash lawsuits will be in the garbage before you can blink." She turned away, ignoring the furious glares from Daniel and everyone else. But what Linda never saw coming was that Judge Harris had pleaded guilty to corruption 3 days earlier. The new judge was an honest black woman who was about to give Linda a rude awakening. A few days later, things only got worse for Linda. Daniel's complaint against the HOA was taken seriously, largely because it wasn't the first time they'd received grievances about the group's bullying tax tactics. An investigation began, and with it, more stories surfaced. They discovered that Linda had been targeting residents without legitimate cause, just to raise funds for important association events, which were essentially parties for her and her friends. She'd also hired shady contractors for common area maintenance and pocketed some of the money. Worst of all, she wasn't even supposed to be the HOA president by the rules. The bylaws stated that anyone in office had to be re-elected after 4 years, but she'd never held a vote. She'd stayed in power because no one had the patience to challenge her until now. A special meeting was called to decide the HOA's future, and Linda was there, trying to defend herself. But the situation had spiraled out of her control. Most of the residents were furious at being deceived. Even her former followers were visibly abandoning her, realizing they'd been used. The final blow came when a county auditor was brought in to review the HOA's finances. The guy unveiled over 20 pages of documents showing more than $50,000 unaccounted for, enough to take Linda down for good. The neighborhood board unanimously voted to remove her from her position immediately. She tried to argue, threatening to sue everyone, but no one listened. Eventually, the police were called. She attempted to slip out, but 2 officers blocked her at the door, and real handcuffs were slapped onto her wrists. Daniel heard one of the residents yell, "Good job, Linda." The self-proclaimed dictator of the neighborhood was escorted away like a common criminal. After Linda vanished from the scene, The neighborhood board underwent a major overhaul. Absurd rules were scrapped for good. Fines were only issued for deliberate violations, and the new board ensured no one could ever hold absolute power over the residents again. The funniest part? A few weeks later, I found out Linda had tried to appeal in court, but it was useless. She had to sell her house and move out of the neighborhood. Word is she headed out to the western U.S., somewhere no one knew her, probably plotting to restart her little control empire on some horse ranch. But in the end, Daniel and everyone else could finally feel at ease in their own homes. Have you ever stood up to an HOA? Want to hear about another HOA showdown? If so, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next confrontation.